Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is Eric, and I'm today joined by Scott Howell. How you doing, Scott?
I'm good. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me today, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott from the Ironsides podcast. So, man, like you're a gym owner, you're running a podcast. Where did all the social media and podcasting start? Like, what was the genesis of that?
Late in life, I've been a gym owner and in the gym business my entire career. So I've been doing this over 25 years, and the social media thing was part of an expansion that we had done with the business. I'd built the business with my partner really from scratch. We had no social media. It was very much guerrilla marketing. I didn't really understand it. One of my marketing buddies was like, dude, you got to have a Facebook. I was like, I don't even know what that is. And so like that started a long time ago, and I was just never really good at it. And then we expanded the business, like sort of tripled in size. And I was like, well, I guess we probably have to finally do the social media thing. And so we did that and kind of struggled and floundered. And then COVID happened. The shutdowns happened. I live in California. All of the gyms in California and the salons in California took it pretty hard. I'm also in the most restrictive county as it relates to the COVID restrictions in California. In fact, our university, San Jose State University, is still requiring masks. So the long story short, yeah, it's wild.
For context, people listening in will be like, "Is this an old recording? Like,
no,
this is 2024."
No.
Okay. My goodness.
That's how kind of crazy things were. So as a gym owner, we got hurt real bad, and then the events of June of 2020 happened in Minnesota, and that created some action here on the streets, which then my gym or my business is just down the street from City Hall. And as things kind of started to escalate and people got pushed in front of my business, I came down here to protect my business. And I realized real quick how unprepared I really was for this. And we could talk about that if you want, but the social media part and the podcast part picked up as we were in COVID, and I was trying to drive traffic to some online products and programs, like a lot of people were trying to do.
Yeah,
and
you're particularly trying to survive, right?
I had to make money. I had to pay my bills. I had to pay my employees. We were navigating through all that. And then when stuff happened, again, going back to the business and protecting it in 2020, I started to train a lot sort of in the world of preparedness. I mean, think of all the things. So medical, firearms training, self-defense, combatives, things I'd done, but never really considered kind of at the next level. Started having a bunch of conversations with a bunch of people, seen a lot of weird stuff on social media, which is where I kind of gone to get a lot of this information, this new genre, if you would. And over time, I was kind of like, well, there's kind of some weird conversations happening out there that are being publicized, but I'm having some really good ones. I wonder if anybody would be interested in listening to these. Startup. So the podcast started with all health and wellness, and then it kind of shifted into documenting my journey. And the rest is history. It's been a fun ride.
I love it. It's kind of where my thing started, was like 2020, as far as trying to air my concerns and a little bit of like my story, my heart, and knowing how so many first responders just felt so dejected with what was happening nationally, but saying, hey, like, we're here, we're people, not to like feel bad for us, but just like we're trying our best. And just to get the kind of receival of that and the feedback of like, man, like, yeah, Eric, we need more people like you that are doing this job. I'm like, you already have them, right? Like, there are people turning coat in that, not in a bad way, not in a judgmental way, like, understandably. There's a lot of good people that left, and there's a lot of good people that stayed, and like, we're just trying to focus on the positive. But those were scary times, man, and I feel for you, for sure, for gym owners, and so many people went under. And just to see what was so helpful for people's mental and physical health, to remove that was just so disheartening.
Yeah, the irony of it was so disheartening for us too, because we knew the role that we were fulfilling for people here, and it wasn't so to give some context. This is the business we own is all personalized services, so it's not a you swipe your card, you come in, you work out, you go home type of thing, and there's nothing wrong with that model. I worked that model for 15 years,
Hmm.
but the this is personalized coaching, and with that comes personal relationships, and with that comes a deep understanding of how the things that you or what the things that you do as a coach, the things that you can provide or the direction you can steer people into, how it literally impacts and changes their life. And when you take that away, and that goes deeper than just how you look in the mirror. um,
Hmm.
we watched some people have a really, really tough time, and I think the irony of it is it wrecked me. I was really challenged in a lot of different ways, and of course, the kids are at home and they're at school, and they're challenged, and they're watching my partner CC and I, as my partner in life as well, go through the challenges that we were going through. It was hard, man. It was so hard. So reaching out and trying to find people like you or listening to people like what you're doing now was actually very tough to find, because most
Hmm.
people were just angry and afraid.
Yeah.
And that was me. That was
Yeah.
certainly me too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I reflected on that literally last night with my wife, and we were recounting like those days and how much fear there was. Right, you said angry and afraid, and I was certainly angry about a lot of things, and I was certainly afraid of a lot of things. And in some ways, I feel so grateful to be a first responder in those times, because having community, having
Hmm.
interactions with my people, being out and about in the community, and keeping my sanity, right? But at the same time, like I had friends that they were so terrified to go outside, so terrified to go to the store, right? And like that, we all recognize, I think, regardless of your disposition, everyone recognizes how detrimental that period of time was on our mental health. And, it's being studied. It's going to be studied for a while. But just to reflect on, yeah, how much we need, and it's not a lot, but it's community, it's
Hmm.
interaction, it's connecting, and being physical and being able to express and support our health in all these different ways.
Yeah, the community piece was the part that was the hard part, probably the hardest part, because we had worked for 10 years to build the community that we had. And it wasn't just that we weren't able to see them because our door was closed, right? It was that they were retracting kind of back in, and we were having a tough time trying to connect with them. And then, of course, all the things that were happening, the thing was so politicized at so many different levels. And we were trying
Hmm.
to stay out of that. Just go, hey, we just want you to be healthy and safe, and whatever that means, we want to help you. But when that community then started to move away from the area, and so it wasn't like we were just being separated by a mandate or a computer screen. It was like now, geographically they're gone. I mean, those are our friends, those are our family, and they're gone. And not knowing what that was going to look like coming out the other side, but also having good experience with building it in the past and being able to kind of put your finger on the pulse of like, how do you do this as a business at this time? How do you really serve this person's needs and so forth? We felt really confident as well. The doors are going to open back up, and things are going to be great. We'll figure it out. It's going to hurt, but we'll figure it out. The real challenge was is seeing that it didn't work that way. And people were still angry and afraid of all kinds of things. And now is a different sort of playing field to have to navigate from. And that was for me one of the things that really came up for me in those couple of years, because that's what it was. My door was shut for over a year, but the couple of years of kind of navigating through, and even now, was I did a lot of traveling during that time, because we had to get out of here. Like I was like,
Hmm.
we have to leave here. Like I have to get out. We went to other states and other regions, and
Yeah.
how those communities were coming together in a lot of ways, how they were treating things. I think the mindset and the overview um, gave me hope. I was, but at the same time, really frustrated me, because when I would come back here, it was anything but that. And
Yeah.
I'm still challenged by that. I really
Yeah,
am.
you're like, you see what's possible, right? And you see how people are thriving and they're carrying on, right? And my wife and I went to Salt Lake City, of all places, in COVID, and we're
Same.
like, man, what a beautiful place, right? Like you're surrounded by purple mountains, and as soon as you land, and people are kind, there's so much nature, this abundance, and we're like, man, we're doing that thing that so many people did, I think, especially on the West Coast, right? Where man, what could life look like? Where could you go? And that was super prevalent in my circles, right? Like I have I have buddies that left, the state that continue to be in cops. I had buddies that left law enforcement work altogether,
Mm.
and that's not uncommon, in that period.
Yeah, we're still dealing with that now, and I think I go through some of those thoughts on a regular basis. Like, is this really the right place for us? From a values perspective, but also less of that, just like from a viability perspective. I
Mm,
mean, it really makes zero financial sense to be a small business owner in this state anymore. I mean, it just seems it is. I'm kind of laughing out of half the side of my face because it just seems so ridiculous sometimes. But you pile that on top of, you're trying to rebuild community and you're trying to get a foothold in kind of what is normal,
mhm.
and you're seeing kind of what normal may look like in other places. It's tough. I mean, I'm challenged still with that, and I've seen a lot of my friends move, and they're thriving,
Yeah.
living someplace else or walking away from. We lost a veteran staff that needed to do other things or move to other places, and for the most part I'm watching them thrive, which makes me happy and gives me hope. At the same time, I'm still like, it didn't need to be like that, and can we just please move on?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so many crossovers that I wanna take a moment to
Sure.
focus on because there man, so much of life, I think, is recognizing the need and serving the need, and there is this degree of ownership and grind. But at the same time, if your networks and your environment isn't conducive to what you're trying to do, it does beg you to ask the question, like, am I even wanted here? And I feel
Right.
like that was a very common feeling and sentiment of law enforcement, in some of these areas, certainly in mine. But man, if I am I even wanted here? I feel so villainized and like this vitriol, this like when you're contending with that, and then you have a crossover, which is you. And I feel so strongly for those that are in the health space that are doing that necessary work, because we have a more stressed populace, more unhealthy populace than ever.
Hmm.
And I recognize that people that own a gym, whether it's an MMA gym or a traditional lifting gym, like, and especially you're coaching, you're working with individuals, like, you are a leader in the community, and we need to recognize that value of that leadership, because you're a mentor, you're a teacher, you're a coach, and we need that. We need more and more of that. And so for you to be so, I mean, maybe it's not villainized is the right word, but if you're shut down, you're not allowed to be doing the things you need to do to take care of those around you and yourself, then like, what does that feel like?
Yeah, man, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think we did feel villainized at times. I mean, it was, the number infection rate would go up, and it would be, we'd literally hear from our state government and our governor, shut down the gyms. I'm like, dude, you
Yeah.
shut us down
Did you
like
have people,
6
like,
months ago.
reporting you and things like that? Like, so many
Oh,
gyms dealt
for
with,
stuff
like.
we weren't doing,
Mm,
and so the health department here, the county health department is literally 2 blocks over from us. So, like, we were I would venture to say it was harassment. We had moved outside. We were trying to do things, but we were trying to play within the rules too, man. Because going back to, a lot like maybe, and it might be comparable to law enforcement. You have rules that you
yeah.
have to follow,
Mhm.
and there are things that you need to do, and you're trying to play within those rules and still do your job at the end of the day, make a living, get the job done. And not everybody understands those rules or those parameters the same way, and not everybody wants to follow those things the same way. So there's this constant juggling act. But yeah, I think going back to trying to be a leader or pillar of the community, maybe coming from law enforcement or, being in the health and fitness space, I think where we got really challenged with that is just because you're there doesn't mean you're a leader. And we had this, God, everybody was asking questions from, I mean, I just mentioned it, like we saw what happened in the events of 2020 with George
Mhm.
Floyd and all that, and people questioned. They were already questioning, like, wow, law enforcement is running, they're out of control, right?
Mhm.
There's just, there needs to be, we need to defund the police, we need to do all this stuff. But then there's this whole other aspect of it. It was like, no, we need these guys. And there's some really good cops out there that are really trying to do a good job. And they do on a regular basis, but they're not necessarily being highlighted or whatever else. And at the same time, they're being villainized. They're being lumped in with the greater group. I think going back to like the fitness side of things, like, yeah, there were some people that were really trying hard to do a good job and do their best to play by the rules. Because keep in mind, we're also in Silicon Valley, which was, let's just say, it was very, very conservative with regard to the like COVID restrictions and shutdowns and things like that. So not in
Sure.
the conservative and like the political sense, just like, oh, we are locking it down. And those are our members. Those are our clients. So
Hmm.
despite how we might have felt about everything, we also had to internalize a lot of that and kind of look at it from the bigger picture and go, look, we have our feelings, but we also, we have a job to do and we have a living to make. And that became very challenging, and kind of that juggling act of balancing, uh, I think, values and just your personal stake in things against, I want to help you, but I also need you to understand where I'm coming from as a provider, as a
Yeah.
help giver,
Hmm.
and let's just put the all this other stuff aside and get down to what is really important right now. For me, it was, your health is challenged and I can help you get to wherever you need to go to some extent, or at least guide you. And that's the bigger thing. I want to do that for you, but I can't fight you on whatever the thing is.
Hmm.
And because that's not going to help either of us get what we want out of this situation. And so when I looked at law enforcement, again, going back to the training side of things, also what was happening out on the street as a business owner and as a citizen who lived 2 blocks from here, I was having regular interactions, much more regular interactions with law enforcement. And I was having these conversations and I was seeing the look of defeat.
Hmm.
And uh, I, I think just like, I don't know what maybe the word is, like demoralization.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
and out there, and I could feel that, and I was like, man, I feel the same way. This is interesting. And then I would go out and I would train, say on the firearms range, or maybe we were doing some combatives or whatever else, and I was recognizing what you saw is like people were really feeling this. They were trying to do the best they could, but they're really feeling this, and were searching for community. And that's kind of what part of the podcast was. I was just searching for people to talk to that I could have conversations with and not feel, I don't want to say villainized or victimized, but because that's not it. It was more just like, can we relate? So that we
Hmm.
can work to some solutions on some things and provide those solutions to the people that want them, right? The
Yeah.
people that want to listen to this or want to take advantage. So
Yeah, I
sorry, I
love
kind
that
of rambled
positive
on there. I
spin.
apologize.
No, that's great, and you covered a lot of ground because out of this conflict, out of this controversy and this adversity, like you have a couple things emerge. Sometimes you do have exactly what you said. You have certainly a lot of victims, right? Like, and no one wants to be that, but we fall into different versions of that. We have our pity parties, and I recognize like sometimes there we turn into the villains too, right? And so we have this corrosive energy, but uh, no, I really appreciate seeing, regardless of the background, of people just saying, hey, like I want to be part of something better, so I'm going to have these conversations. Sometimes they're uncomfortable conversations, but
Mm.
like how do we get better as individuals, as leaders, as community members, which is exactly what this is all about.
It is at the end of the day, and it's recognizing things, trying to I think through the lens of like a holistic approach of looking at a problem or looking at a situation, like what are all the major pieces here, and let's not discount any of those. Let's not spend too much time on any one or the other. Let's make sure we get ourselves together on how to find a solution here. But going back to all this, there was such an impact on mental health and wellness, and that was one of the things I was really picking up. And then it kind of hit me in the square in the face up from the law enforcement first responder side of things when I started to come in contact with people that are now dear friends of mine that are first responders, firefighters, police officers, or working for some type of a government agency, and the challenges that they were having, and on their own end, just in doing their job on a regular basis, but also seeing all the other things that they would typically see anyways, right? Which was just like this kind of this cumulative trauma of being villainized. Well,
Hmm.
seeing all the things you see as a first responder on a regular basis, then being villainized at this particular time for whatever the reasons or whatever that person who was a victim wanted to direct or project at that person, and then at the end of the day having to go home and deal with their own stuff. That
Yeah.
was another big piece of it. And so I stepped back during my journey. I was just like, man, this is a bigger problem than I may have ever given it credit for across the board, but particularly for guys that are doing like what you're doing. I was like, man, we got a big problem here and it's not being addressed. We're almost pretending like it doesn't exist. And so when you put like kerosene on the forest fire, like you do with a thing like COVID, man, does it expose
Mm.
a lot of things across society. And I think that those were some of the parallels I was recognizing sort of from my business, what I was trying to help people with, and then what I was seeing going on, outside of the gym, with regard to my community, who I wanted to see come together, but I was like losing hope. I was really losing hope.
Yeah, I think that's such an objective view because it's not like it created all this, but it exposed it, right? It highlighted it. And these are issues that we've been contending with, like societally. And I think that that's extremely important, right? We all have a part to play: first responders, criminal justice, healthcare, education, right?
Mm.
All of these factors, like they need to interplay and we all have to take a piece of it. And it is to hopefully get better, right? Not just keep pointing fingers and saying something doesn't work. Like, okay, cool. How do we get there?
Yeah, without an expectation that you're going to necessarily get something back right away from it. I think that's another big issue is sort of this need for instant gratification, and whether that's you know making money or acknowledgement or validation. I think people just lost sight of doing the right thing for sake of doing the right thing. I
Mm,
mean, that's and then now there's questions about, well, what is right? Well, this is the law. Well, it's the law. It doesn't necessarily make it right, right?
yeah.
It's the lawful thing to do, you know, but it's not really the correct thing to do.
I love that
And I
we
think,
went there. Yeah. Because,
yeah, I think that,
we have
yeah, I
to
think it's
we have to
weird.
ask those questions of ourselves, like, when we those in everyone in this society, but certainly those that enforce the law, like law enforcement, what does that look like, and what is right? And we saw across the nation, like, cops cops enforcing these kind of mandates, right? And, like, citing people, like, that are out and about in parks, and, man, I feel so grateful that I didn't have to have the ideological challenge because I had it with, with my wife. I was like, man, what I'm seeing things that are happening. Where do I draw the line? Fortunately, my leadership wanted nothing to do with that. They're like, you will not go out
Mm,
and enforce these like social distancing things. If people are hanging out in their yards and businesses, like that is them. And so I feel so fortunate to not even have to contend with that. But I'd be watching and being like, man, like we know what quote unquote just following orders can turn into. And I think
mm,
that's a very responsible conversation to have. And some people might hear this and be like, what are you talking? You are making these huge stretches. I'm like, but no, because right is right, right? I didn't mean to say right at the end of it, but it's such a thing. And in law enforcement, we receive training about the Holocaust for a specific reason, right? And like I love those instructors that come in, and it's not like pointing fingers, but it's just saying, hey, we need to learn from history. And that's so much of the deep dive is just recognizing like where are we at, what are we doing, what is our purpose. And it was very positive training. Like I loved interacting with the Seattle Holocaust Center for that. But yeah, just not to keep spiraling in all these different directions, but I think that's so relevant for the majority of my listeners, which are in law enforcement.
I think it is too, man. I don't think it's a spiral at all. I think it really hits the nail on the head with regard to what I believe from the outside looking in as an observer, but also somebody who is actively involved at some level. This challenge of how do I navigate this particular situation, whether it's a call or whatever, but also, in my department with my peers, but also in my department with my leadership, and what's happening above that level of leadership. How much can I control versus how much can't I?
Hmm.
And again, how do I go to work every day and get through this and go home at the end of the day and feel like I I did a good thing today versus I did my job. Because
Yeah.
as soon as I believe in my heart that 99.9% of law enforcement or first responders, whatever, they get into the business of being a first responder because they want to help people. They want to serve. And as soon as you start taking that away and it becomes more of you're going to instruct, or you're going to be permissive or non-permissive, and you're going to take things away from people, that it very quickly challenges, I think, the moral fabric of who you are as a person. And obviously as a first responder, to if I take it over to the firefighter side of things, I mean, what are we doing out there every day, man? We're going out there and we're giving people Narcan, right? That's what we're doing. Is this
Hmm.
life-saving? Are we helping people? I mean, in a weird, if you want to do that mental jujitsu, or judo, whatever you want to call it, to
Yeah.
weave through that weird, very weird conversation to you, because the answer you want to come up with is yes. But on the backside of that, you also understand, you really know that the answer is no, we're not.
Mm,
Getting up and going through that every day will have and take a mental and emotional toll on you. And being told that it shouldn't or it doesn't, which is what we saw for a long time, and I think is even I think the message is starting to change. It's starting to get there, but to think that it won't, and that it won't impact you both on the job and then outside when you go home, like you're just going to put this in a box and forget about it,
mm,
is ridiculous. And so I don't think this is a spiral, man. I think it really is kind of addressing the things that I think most people know or believe in their heart. They're maybe not in an environment where they can comfortably have that conversation, whether that's an intrinsic thing or an extrinsic thing. I don't know. So again, when I see folks like you doing what you're doing, I'm just like, more of this, because
yeah,
when the people that I talk to, I know it does make an impact. They're just not necessarily public about it. They'll tell me on the side, or they probably do the same for you.
sure.
They don't necessarily get real public about, man, this is the message that needs to go out. They'll just say, thanks, man, for doing that, because you're doing a good thing. We wish we could do more to spread the message.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit of a tangent, but some of the themes you're talking about made me think like everyone has a choice.
Mm,
And when you're doing this job, when you're doing a job, any job, you have certain boundaries, right? These are good. These are like guidelines, boundaries, policies, laws, good. But then even within that, some people might hear, well, I mean, I don't have the liberty of doing as you say, Eric, right? Like I have a job that I have to do, and sometimes I don't want to do it a certain way. Well,
mm,
let's break that down, because
mm.
I never had a quota for writing, speeding tickets or anything like
Right.
that. Like we got bigger things to worry about. But there's a traffic unit that has to write a certain number of things. It's not a hard quota, but you got to deliver metrics to your job. But
Yeah, it's
with that,
performance based.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so if you have agencies that have quotas or quote unquote quotas, that's a lot of alliteration by accident, uh but think about it this way, like I have stopped, I don't even countless numbers of cars, how many tickets I've written, less than that. So like there's discretion. And if you say, hey, like tongue, you don't get my agency, I gotta write 5 tickets a day on top of my patrol response.
Mhm.
Okay, well, you have the discretion to make sure that there are people that have earned a ticket, right? Like you don't have to, write the mom that's running late for her kid's doctor's appointment, or kids throwing up in the car. Like find a better stop, right? Like keep going. And so I do just like to present that example, because we all have choices, even if we're given something like a directive. There is play within there, and ultimately, we are in the industry where it's hard to find good cops. So if you don't align with a certain culture, like vote with your feet, right? You can try to lead up, you can try to have the conversation, but vote with your feet. Like I know a dude that he left my area, not my department, but for another area where it was closer to home, kind of a pace that he was looking for. And he ended up being in field training, and he was told by his field trainer, like, this is a seasoned cop. He's told his field trainer he has to physically arrest someone for shoplifting a toy for her kid on the holidays. And it was like he's a seasoned cop, so it's not just like a new person that's like, well, she said it's for a kid. Like it was
Right.
legit. It wasn't like organized retail theft, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's like no, like a toy and some food. And he was just like, hey, I don't want to do it. He's like, you have to do it. And so he did it, and he just lost sleep over it. He's like, dude, if this is the agency culture, I'm out. I And so he had the conversation. He was ready to quit. They're like, hey, we respect your decision to use discretion. And so the bosses were like, we promise, we'll never put you in that position again. He's like, okay, like I don't need this job as much as you need me. And like, good on him, right? Because it's
Right.
that kind of conviction. He knows why he does the job. He knows what service means. But in that example, he's like, F this. This is not me. This is not what I want to do.
So interesting you're bringing this up. So recently, in the district that we're in, the city municipal district we're in, there's a city council race happening right now for the
Mm,
one that our business is located in, and there's been a lot of activity, and we've had a few incidents down here at the gym, some vandalism, a fire, some burglaries, lots of stuff, right, that
mm,
we're dealing with on a regular basis here. And what that's driven is a lot of conversation in the neighborhood with business owners as well as the business association, and it's brought in quite a few of the candidates and concerned citizens around those events, and making decisions to change things in the future. And the top three things, and I believe this is probably the same in most cities across America, what the major metropolitan areas is, We got to talk about homelessness. We got to talk about crime, and we got to talk about economic development. And with each one of those things, obviously there's a deep dive you could take. But on the law enforcement side of the crime side of things, the major points that keep getting brought up, and I think this speaks to what you're saying. Stick with me here. Is that the problem is they're trying to solve the problem of recruitment, um, and then obviously hiring and then retention
Hmm.
with dollars and some type of monetary incentive. And I look that's part of it. That's going to be part of it. Especially like I said, I live in Silicon Valley. It's ridiculous. Like starting pay here,
Yeah.
for a police officer, even if it's $125,000, it gets you nothing here. It might get
Hmm.
you an expensive apartment,
Yeah. It
but
gets you a
at
long
best,
commute, right?
that's
Like,
what it does. I
yeah.
mean, like we have most of our I want to say most. It's a very high number of our first responders across police and fire that do not live in this community. They don't even live within an hour of here. So if they were off duty and there was a major catastrophic event or whatever, and maybe that even shut down some of our infrastructure, freeways, things like that, we're not even getting those first responders into our city. My point of this is not about the money piece, but more about like that's the attempt to fix the challenge or the problem, and that's what people are talking about. That's what a politician can stand on and say, well, I'm going to cut here or I'm going to redirect budget here or whatever else.
Hmm.
And I think the bigger part is what you're saying there is like, but two things. One, you haven't empowered these, or you've taken away the power of these officers to do the job in the way that they need to do it in order to actually reduce crime, right? To, whatever that happens to be, whatever your top issues are, because you've hamstrung them, right? And you've passed some bill or some proposition or whatever that basically makes this not a crime, or it is, but it's a slap on the wrist. And on the other side, you're telling them to go out every day and that they have to enforce this or they have to do that, which doesn't change the problem at all. Like you're not trusting or entrusting the job of, in this case, the law enforcement officer to do the job, which is to enforce the law. So you've taken that away, and then you've then moved it to the next level, the judiciary system, which then basically lets them go. So it's like you're double compounding it for the officers out there. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here, Eric. I get that, but my point to these politicians is you are you've talked about the retention or the hiring, recruitment, hiring, and retention. You're not talking about what you're doing to empower them to actually do the job that they signed up to do
Mm.
in the way that makes the most sense. You put them through all this training, let them do their job, and then back them up, right?
That's the support. Yeah.
Instead of telling them this is how you have to do it, especially when they know that's not the right way to do it. Going back to the shoplifting thing, like, really, this is what we're focusing on today?
Yeah.
Like, just give me 5 minutes, right? If I just spend enough time around here, I'm sure I'm going to see the person that we should be enforcing the law
Hmm.
against. That's a big challenge for me, particularly in my neighborhood when I see what's
No.
going on out there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought these themes up because it, it might be a little preaching to the choir to the people that are listening. They're like, there's not like a bunch of people that are going to be super anti that statement, listening in. But I think it is important to reflect on it for a couple of reasons. One is that you have a unique seat compared to us. Like we can recognize it from the inside, but you're a business owner and you're trying to make your thing work, right? And it to have a brick and mortar business embeds you into the community in a different way. And so I love a lot of you being on this and having these conversations because we should really pay stock to that
Mm.
position, right? That you are a constituent, you are of the community that we're trying to protect and represent and take care of, right? And so it is very impactful when not only do you recognize these things, but we should pay a lot of attention because dissimilar to other people, I mean, you have neighbors and friends that probably moved to Montana or Idaho or something like that, but like it is
Lots of
different.
them.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you work remote, like cool. Like what's tying you down? Nothing. Right? Like you have a brick and mortar business. You can't just up and leave. And you talked about how you were responding to protect your business because that is your livelihood. That is your life. And
Hmm.
so even the example I give about cops, like I mean, you can be a cop here, you can be a cop there, but you can't be a business owner here and there. You have investment, you have structure, infrastructure, all these things, right? And so you can't just pack it up. You have to try to make it work, like so many people have, and sadly, a lot of people weren't able to because of a lot of these dynamics that we're talking about. But maybe this is a good time, because I did want to ask you what that was like when you're earlier on, beginning of the conversation, you're talking about responding to all the issues going on around your business.
Well, couple things. First off, we'd been shut down here for a while, and we're in a downtown area, which was really up and coming, and the reason it was driving that direction and we moved down here, it was there's a very large company out there that everybody's very familiar with called Google
Mm,
that had just purchased a ton of property. Purchased is kind of an interesting term, because it was more like it was given to them
mm,
literally in our neighborhood. They were going to build a huge campus, and it was driving a ton of development. And so with that, driving a lot of high-rise new apartment buildings, a new kind of urban village development, which we moved into and fit the need for perfectly, where
mm,
people, kind of come and stay and play, live, take their laundry to get it done, have a meal at the restaurant, get their grocery shopping done at Whole Foods
yeah,
across the street, all that kind of stuff.
mhm,
And so we were seeing it like on this uptick, was just like, it was like gangbusters, and everybody was super pumped. And what was interesting with that was the growth and this vitality that was being pumped into the neighborhood wasn't coming from the neighborhood. It was coming from this promise, or this leveraged kind of funny money that this big company was going to come in, and that was driving up home prices and, property values, and, the the potential for businesses to move in and make a bunch of money, because people would be living and working down here, and it was going to drive a bunch of traffic. And I say all that to say, because in a very short period of time, it was wild. We also have a public transportation system here. For anybody that lives in the Bay Area, they know about Caltrain. Runs basically from South County all the way up into San Francisco.
mhm,
And so there was transportation stuff, or availability for people booming. Then the shutdowns happen. And all of a sudden, like, I've never seen anything implode as fast as it did here. And we were watching things on TV, like maybe what was happening in Portland, like maybe what was happening in places like New York City, other major metropolitan areas that go, oh, well, it's not that bad here. It's not that
mm,
bad here. But the reality of it was just spread across the entire Bay Area. It wasn't like one specific,
sure,
major hub. And so for me, I was a little kind of like, yeah, well, we're gonna do okay and we're fine. But we were watching the drug problem and the psychiatric crisis issue erupt literally in front of our eyes, just out on the street. So I was kind of watching it tear down. I'm like, this is awful. This is terrible. I'm watching sort of compassion turn into cruelty here. And then as that continues to escalate, ultimately that brings with it a lot of other things. And that's crime and um, violence,
yeah,
vandalism. And so for me, I really felt like it was an island all by myself. We already knew, law enforcement was already stretched here. We've been understaffed here for a long, long time.
mhm,
Now a problem arises, like a real legit problem and threat, and they were being pulled, and we were just kind of here. And that whole saying, like, "No one's coming to save you," like, that's a thing that I've always known my whole life. I think I've always kind of been like, look, man, you got to be your own first responder, or be prepared. I was a Boy
mhm,
Scout, right? Be prepared. The Boy
yeah,
Scout motto. My dad always kind of my dad was always like that from a family perspective. But I'm telling you, as fast as it turned, I mean, everything from starting with there's no more toilet paper in the grocery store, to I'm standing in a 2-hour line to get into grocery stores because of, like social distancing things and stuff like that. Going back to what you were saying, the how quickly it can change when people are just doing their job or following orders. It was scary, man. It was really scary. And then on the side of that, I'm watching everything I had built be destroyed.
mhm,
So it was a wild, and still is. I'm damaged by it. Like, I am definitely I'm definitely jaded by the whole thing.
yeah,
Um and we're trying to, like, you said, we are doing our best as a brick and mortar to do our jobs here. There's some other factors here that keep me here. Elderly parents, like, I don't want to leave them. I got
yeah.
brother and nephew, and I've
Your
got a
life's here.
stepdaughter.
Yeah,
I've got a stepdaughter who lives here, or whose dad lives here. So, that's just, I can't just pack up and go. And so feeling there's a sense of being trapped at the same time in the business, right? In the community, in the, all the different dynamics. That's not a good place for people to be when all they want to do is help people and try and
mhm,
thrive. I didn't get into this business to make a bazillion bucks. I knew I was never going to do that. I just was I'm just a dude trying to provide a service to the community, provide employment to other people that are trying to do the same thing, and live a quality of life that affords me, the things that I want to do, as well as a few of the things I need to do, and I'd be good. But that's being challenged and it's being threatened. Was threatened then, and more than ever, it's being threatened now, and that's tough. It's still tough on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. And it's like you only feel trapped because of the external factors, right? And it's like you would love to be doing the thing the way you'd love to be doing it in the community where where you're received, but um, that's so much, right? And there's that parallel again to support, right? You talking about throwing money at like a signing bonus, which I just came out of recruiting prior to my promotion, like as a recruiting sergeant,
Mm,
and sure we had a bonus, which you had to be uh viable in the space, but
mhm,
where we found so much success was recognizing that we can be supportive of our candidates, right? We had this notion of, hey, we're going to engage and we're going to show up and we're going to mentor and we're going to demonstrate what they can expect to
mm,
receive here as a future employee, right? There used to be this notion of, okay, you test and then you prove yourself. I'm like, no, we got to prove ourselves to them. And we had a huge success, right? But at the same time, people don't quit, their agency as much as they quit their bosses. And
yep,
so recognizing that everyone has a stake in the game, every like the peers do, the line level, every chain, link of the chain going up the bosses, like that made a thing. And when you saw certain administrations, and not just chief bosses or sheriff bosses, but city official bosses, like that's where you had the mass attrition because of decisions that
mhm.
they were someone's decision to make or someone's decision to not make. But then you had just exoduses of certain cities, and we saw it all across the nation, right? Your neighborhood, my neighborhood, but where we did not have the issues that we had to surmount compared to some of our neighbors, certainly.
It's interesting. A couple things came up for me there. One was just going back to the not being able to do the job in the way you want to be able to do the job as an officer, and kind of what laws are and whatnot. I had a conversation, on another podcast about this. Just maybe cops saying I can't do my job the same way I used to, and the argument is no, you can still do your job. You just might have to do it differently,
Mm,
right? And not differently like the law has changed, just that there's more accountability to the way you're doing your job, whereas before it might not have been there. You talk about worn cameras and things
sure.
like that, and obviously the all the cell phones that are out there now, and everybody's got a camera. That's certainly is part of that, but it's not that you can't do your job. So then you just have to figure out a way to do it differently. Now move over to the apartment piece, where what I just heard you say there was there is an engagement from the department with their future officers. Gone are the days when people just want to be, I want to be a cop, and they sign up, right?
Yeah.
And within that volume or that density of people that came through there, there was some good enough to be cops, regardless of whether or not they were disillusioned about what the job was, or
Hmm.
they had the physical abilities or mental capacity to be able to do that. Those days are gone. It's that way in business now too, right? In terms of like hiring new employees. You're not you don't just put out a job ad and expect you're going to get 30 candidates to choose from.
Yeah.
You might get a couple, and you're lucky if they show up for the interview, right? Like it's that kind of a thing. So when I look at departments, like I had another interview with a guy who's currently in he's a Green Beret, and we were talking about the concept of kind of the same thing, like with regard to recruiting, like in people complaining about the level of candidate they might be getting. It's not the same, all of these things. He's like, well, if you don't like what you're getting, then take some responsibility and go out there and find it. Go
Hmm.
recruit it. And then once you do that, make sure you're supporting them in their way or their pathway to get there. And I look at this as business. If we started treating our police departments like a good business, right, we would be looking at top line versus bottom line in a much different kind of way. And that a lot of that has to do with the decision making
For
processes. Like,
sure.
what are our goals here? Because if it's just to fill a number or hit a statistic, we're just going to keep getting what we've been getting, and we don't fix the problem. And again, what you have is a disgruntled officer who's got 15 years on the job that could put in probably 10 more if
Hmm.
he wanted to, but
Yeah.
he doesn't want to anymore. He's like you said, he's beating the street, or he's voting with his feet. He's out of there. or just completely taken, takes a step back. Like, I don't want to mentor anymore. I don't want to be part of this recruitment.
Hmm.
I just want to be left alone, and I'm going to try and keep my nose clean and stay out of trouble. You know who gets hurt the worst at the end of the day? It's it's me.
Yeah.
It's the brick and mortar,
Yeah.
citizen who's trying
Just
to follow the law and get through
people
his
trying to
day.
live their
Yeah,
lives, which is like our fundament. Like, there's all these different things that law enforcement has become, but at the end of the day, we're there to protect lives, like to protect people so they can live in safe communities. And safe communities is that's probably a triggering word for a lot of people, because they're like, I don't have that, right? Like, you talk about understaffed in, our big city nearby, Seattle. Like, there was a whole, it's in the national news, like a whole neighborhood that was given up to vigilante. Like, the rule of law was gone in a whole neighborhood, and like, who was really affected? The people that lived there, the people that did
right.
business there. Like, there was this, chop chaz of like lawlessness of people with ARs. Like, what is happening, right?
Yeah,
Like, it is like a third world country with warlords out here, and people are getting shot, and the megs can't go in safely, right? Like, how many cops do you need to wait for to assemble a group to go in where they're being challenged at gun? Like, that is that is not what we think about modern day America, right?
America. Yeah,
It
yeah,
is
yeah.
nuts.
It's really challenging. I see the same things, sort of happening here, and even those that really wanted to kind of, I don't know, bury their head in the sand, maybe even deny it at some level, like, oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. They're even forced now to go, this is a big problem. I just had, going back to burglaries, uh, 10 days ago, we were burglarized here yet again at the gym. They were able to manage their way through the front door.
Mm,
Um, you know, CC, again, my partner in life and business, showed up at just before 5 a.m. to get her workout in before everybody started kind of coming in. And as it turns out, she came through the back door unknowing that people had come through the front door.
mm,
And this is not the first time. This is about the third time this has happened in this kind of sequence of events where she comes through and doesn't realize somebody had already come through had already been in there, and they could have still been there. She was here by herself. And so there's this, and obviously there's a lot of emotions that go through her and me and our staff and our
yeah.
members with that. Like, just first, like this, it's so violating, and then it turns into this anger, and then that gets redirected to like thinking about like what are the realities of this situation. The realities of the situation could have gone very bad, and that is scary. That creates fear. And with that, like for me as a business owner, as the partner and everything else, there's a feeling of like guilt to some extent. Like,
Mm,
again, that nothing happened to her. Thank God, right?
mhm.
But like, if something did, what responsibility do I play in that for not just folding up shop and we just got to get out of here for the sake of being safe. And I think what you're seeing in a lot of communities right now is that is a very stark reality, and they're being hit in the face. Well, it's not that bad. Come on, man. Like, you're being a little dramatic. Or, until they have to call 911, it takes 5 minutes for first responder to get there because they're stretching over in another district, and they recognize real fast that, oh my God, like, it is that way. We're starting to see a little bit of a shift here, but it's way behind the curve,
Mhm.
way behind the curve. And so going back to the reality of, I think, what people are faced with right now, what you're seeing people afraid to make decisions. And I don't know when that changes. Maybe that has, maybe police officers feel the same way. I don't know, but they're afraid to say and do anything that might make them look weird, or that they'd have to walk back on a statement or a position they took before, or whatever else. That's a real challenge, I think, for business owners like me in a community like this, who, again, just want to come together, but are struggling with that very thing. Like, nobody really wants to say anything or do anything right now.
Yeah. No, it's such a thing, and it just links up to the conversation we've been having, which is, I mean, you even said it. If police departments or city public safety was run like a business, like, what lessons could be learned, right? Because
Hmm.
businesses have accountability. Like, you got to make money, and you got to show metrics and data, and so that could equate directly to non-monetary things like crime rate. That could equate to actual monetary things like overtime, and
Hmm.
what is being spent on these less effective police methods, right? If you have so many people that are practicing not just attrition, but you have absenteeism because of the poor culture. And again, I'm not just pointing fingers at chiefs and sheriffs, there's some fantastic upper leadership they are bound by what
Hmm.
the troops might even know, like, yeah, I actually do trust my personal chief or sheriff, but I know that if something happens, like, there's not a whole lot they can do
They
for
can
me
do.
with the city or the county or the state or what have you, right? Like, and so that degree of support, right? The feeling that people can actually do the job the way they need to, like, that is all intertwined. But if those in charge had some degree of accountability to the taxpayers, to the residents, to say, hey, like, here's what I'm doing to enhance culture and morale so that people aren't leaving, or people that we hire aren't just going to leave after they get through training to go to a more supportive culture, which happens all the time.
Hmm.
It's literally just like a gateway. Or at the same time, you don't have absenteeism where people are like retired on duty because
Hmm.
do they really want to go to the call right away where they encounter the suspect? Like, we know that exists, and like I think that any law enforcement officer that gets mad that I even mention it, let's not be in denial. There are those cops. I mean,
They're
there's a
shagging
lot
calls.
of cops that will get there and do what they can as fast as they can, but there's a lot of cops that wait because
Hmm.
waiting's easy, right? It's a lot easier to take a report on your burglary than challenging someone at gunpoint and see what happens, right?
Right.
How does this play out with people so volatile, and can you de-escalate someone that's high with mental health issues and all these things? Yeah, man. I think it is a relevant conversation to have and everything.
I don't think I'm not, that's not lost on me at all. I try to keep a very objective viewpoint, and I try and do that by asking lots of questions and trying to be involved where I can. That's part of the podcast, but I'm pretty active, I think, from a communication perspective otherwise. And I've always prided myself on, like, look, before I might take a position that I might change, in the
Yeah.
future. I don't know, but based on what I know now, it's this. And you said something that maybe, I think you prefaced a comment or finished a comment with, this might be an unpopular thing to say,
Mm,
as a police officer or in the profession. I'll go ahead and go there too with what might be a controversial statement, and that is, if you expect somebody else to do this for you as a law enforcement officer, and that is to influence leadership, or you just sit back and go, I can't, then you're going to get whatever comes with that. And this kind of goes back to, I can't do my job, or whatever statement gets made there. I I see the leadership issues, and I think a lot of people do. I mean, and I'm not on the inside, I don't know, but I don't know. I can't speak to that. I can just speak to kind of what I see and what I hear other people talking about. And I do think this can be influenced from the inside, that accountability that you spoke of.
for sure.
And that is, the culture holding itself accountable. Stop trying to explain, excuse my language, stop trying to explain shit away.
Hmm.
Like, stop making excuses. And at the same time, stop talking shit about the people that aren't doing a good job all the time. What about the people that are doing a good job? When do we prop those people up? Right? When do we prop those people? When do we use those as the example? They might not be perfect examples, but they're better than, again, that percentage of people that are, again, avoiding things or just doing a terrible job or whatever else. I think that's not a question I can answer, or a problem I can solve. That has to be solved from the inside. And it does come from leadership, but I don't necessarily think it comes from, let's say, the brass, the higher level leadership. I think they need to see it and feel accountable to it
Yeah.
at the mid level. I mean, I mentioned, like, that 10 to 15 year guy, like, or officer. I feel like that's really where it starts, so you can start influencing those that are underneath, that are already looking up to those folks.
Yep.
Um, those and the those are your future leaders, and so the people that are just coming in, they understand what leadership looks and feels and smells like, right?
Hmm.
It's the person that shows up to the job, that's ready to go, that is fit, that is mentally there, that is assertive but professional, that does the extra training, that shows up to the training days, at not needing to be voluntold to be there. When they do, they give it their best, and those are those are things that anybody can do, even if you're an entry level officer, to maybe inspire or show to and again, I'm saying officers, and again, I don't want to speak out of turn. I just think this is just in general, any kind of a team or a business.
Yeah. No.
Everybody
Agreed.
can play a role here in this accountability piece. So I have a really tough time listening to people go, yeah, well, our mayor this, or our city council that, or our chief this. Yeah,
Mhm.
those are humans. Those are individuals. Like, you guys got this department here has over 800 officers on it. Like, what are you guys doing to
Mhm.
influence this instead
Yep.
of? And there are those that are doing it. So not to,
Yeah.
I think these guys are working hard. That's not my point. My point is that the accountability piece is a big one, and people need to stop looking outside for that. And I think there's some things that could be done on the inside.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's a valuable balance, which is like some people want to know what's being done, and you can cite some of the policies, you can cite some of the direction, but ultimately, like, what are you going to do for me today other than telling me why things aren't being done, right? Like, and I think that there's something to be learned from that, right? If it's, hey, message received, like, I'm going to get with my buddies and we're gonna talk to some street sources, right? We're gonna be in the neighborhood more. What that looks like that's a thing, right? At the same time, everyone has a seat at the table, and I love how what you talked about for me is like accountability, and that's ownership. And
Mhm.
ownership is directly correlated and causational to leadership, right? So if you have ownership, you have leadership of yourself, and you can expound that out. So it doesn't mean you have official rank, and this comes up a lot in my conversations, but everyone has a vote, right, to what the culture is at your agency and what your team is doing. And that's 100%, right? You don't have to understand law enforcement to understand how leadership and teamwork could be improved. That's just culture.
Yep.
That's translatable. And so when we look at strong leaders in the private sector or entrepreneurs, like, I mean, shoot, not to butter you up too much, but like if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a sole proprietor of a business, it's on you, right? You can't point
100%.
fingers you can't tell your employees like why this or not. Like, you're either making it work or you're not. Or even if you have no employees, it's one of one. I mean, it's on you whether you float or not. So I think that is very valuable when you think about culture and what to do. And I do think that we're turning the tide. I think that we've pivoted away from our worst times. But
Mhm.
even in these times of fear, that was a continual conversation of seeing things happen from Floyd and then all the other controversial things through the nation, where some of my guys, they'd be paralyzed by fear. And part of that's because there's a lot of business in fear, there's a lot of money in fear. But when I would stop them and actually look at the incident and say, hey, you're citing this thing where, the city's on fire because of this controversial thing. Let's look at this. If you went to that call and you got the information in the order that these officers got it, could you pluck these officers out of this video and put you and your buddies in there in the same exact actions and tell me why or why not? And
Mhm.
it would always be, no, well, no, we would do it different because this is what we traditionally practice, and we de-escalate, or we'd have more cops, or we would have waited before rushing in. So I was like, okay, cool. You've already identified without thinking much a lot of reasons why what's on camera is not going to be how you do business, how we're going to do business tomorrow if we get the same call. So put that aside, right? And that help, like, you explain, you help lead, right, people through that scary time, and then they recognize, okay, cool, I'm not that, we're not that, carry on, let's do our thing.
Yeah, I think an interesting part about that is, and this is a mistake I think people make, and that is they think that leadership specifically, more specifically, what their job is to change or manage culture. It isn't. I don't believe that. Their job is to maybe change, manage, create, enforce policy. And it's up to the people after, and hopefully those things that they've chosen to do influence culture in a positive way.
Yes, yeah.
And it's the people that ultimately develop the culture. So culture needs to be cultivated and then nurtured. And
Hmm.
the only way to be successful with that process is to get aligned on some very specific things. Values are going to be part of that. And then, like, again, like, how do we handle ourselves, and how do we want to be perceived while we're working through our values, right? At whatever those happen to be. And so you made a really good point there that, it's examining the things that have happened as a team. Like, you don't need a policy to go through what you just said. You don't need a policy for that.
Yeah.
Nobody You don't need to be told. You shouldn't have to be told to do that. It should be like, "Hey, we wanna get better. Let's take advantage of this opportunity." That is cultivating culture, bringing people together. The nurturing it is giving everybody a say, a take, an answer, or the opportunity to think about it, talk about it, and then move on with your day. And part of the culture is and this is one we have here at the business, is don't bring me a problem unless you're also bringing a solution.
Hmm.
So it doesn't have to be the solution or the right one, but I want you to think about this before
Yeah, I love
you just
that.
come in and you drop it on my desk or in my lap. Like,
Hmm.
okay, right, problem. What do we do about it? Right?
Yeah.
What can we do to fix it? We, not I, not you,
Mhm.
we. That's culture. And expecting a chief to do that, or a governor or a mayor or whatever. No, I think that's a mistake, and I think it's one of the things we're caught up in. That's why I love watching guys like you having this on the side conversation about and conversations about all the things that go into that, and the individuals that are influencing that because they want to, and at some level are having some success doing it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I love the notions of cultivating and nurturing, right? It's like that adage of leadership being like gardening, where, yeah, you're not responsible. So, like, you can't make the plant grow, but you can certainly water it. You
Right.
can make the soil right. Like, and I think that's what leadership can be, right? You put out the vision, you put out the direction. You can't be in every little entrenched group, subgroup, because then you're micromanaging, then you're not building trust. You have to interact with your next up. So, our traditional rank and structure is like,
Mm,
I'm a commander now, so I have sergeants and I have to work through my sergeants. Like, I can interact with the officers, absolutely, but it won't happen at scale, right? I have to just
right.
support these notions. And so I do have a responsibility outside of the policies and enforcement and in guiding structure. I just got to check in and make sure my sergeants have what they need, because they got to check in and make sure their officers have what they need. And by building and fostering trust, they're going to identify the problems. They're the ones doing it every day. I'm not going to know unless they
Mhm.
tell me. And that's where you have that classic, like, that medieval thing where the king has his advisors and the advisors are afraid to say something because they're toxic and they're going to chop off heads and stuff if they get bad news. Or, World War II dictators, right? Like, all
Right.
this kind of stuff. Like, you gotta demonstrate trust so you can receive it back and get the information you need, even if it's bad, right? And again, before we move on, I love the comparison where you said, "Hey, like, don't just come to me with a problem," because anyone can do that. Anyone can whine, anyone can complain. But I did have an old boss that said, "Come to me with a solution," and I'll say, I like to curb that because it's a little intimidating, especially for a new officer to be like, "I don't know the solution. I just know it's an issue." Cool. So I like where you went, Scott, which is bring me some conversation points, right? Like,
Mhm.
part of it, maybe some themes, and like we can flesh it out together. It doesn't have to be the answer, but like, bring me something constructive. Let's figure it out as a group or a team or what have you. So I love that, because that's going to be a lot more approachable for a lot of new up and coming leaders too.
So it's been successful, I think, for me just in my career, and also letting people know it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be right. Like it doesn't have to be the it's just like anything else. It doesn't have to be, and I wouldn't expect you to have the perfect solution. If you get lucky or you've done a ton of research and you bring to me, whatever, I'm going to prop you up. I'm going to go look what this dude did. Like aside from, the just researching it and bringing me a problem and a solution, but look at the extent to what this person went to come up with this, and be smart. So I think that's part of it too. I just real quick on what you were saying there about being a commander and having to manage down. Um, and doing it at scale. Occasionally, you got to check in with the people that are, below,
Hmm.
the sergeants, whatever your officers on the street. You don't have to do that a lot. The amount of impact that you can get, by just meeting with like for me, it's just, it's a trainer on the floor, a newbie trainer.
Yeah.
Just pull them aside, put your arm around, hey, how's it going? Or a compliment,
Mhm.
and then a check in, because then that just spreads like, hey, dude, like Commander, Tongue just checked in with me today. Dude, we had this
Yeah.
awesome conversation. And so the next time somebody says, "Oh, that Tongue, he's a real asshole,"
Yeah.
that guy
Admin, like,
stands up and
none
goes,
of
"Well,
the
hold on
bosses
just a second."
care. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
thing. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. Hold on just a second. Anyways, that's kind of leadership 101 in my mind. But
No, I agree.
anyhow, yeah, I get where you're coming from, and it's a tough job. So, how do you do that within the structure that you're given? I think it's all very manageable most of the time.
Yeah. Make it simple. And that's where for sure, especially I had more of an issue with it as a new sergeant, of being like, man, what is all the things a sergeant needs to do and how to be the best and how do I have the right answer, the best answer, and like,
Don't mess it up.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
keep the confidence. But
Uh,
man, like, you know what you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. And so I might have said that wrong, but it's just to say, like, have some humility, and people see that, right? Like, check the ego, and it's okay to say, like, good point, fellas. I have no idea. Yep,
Right.
yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
figure it out because like people respect that. Like
Mhm.
you can be vulnerable. You don't have to know it all. Certainly, like no one knows it all. So, uh, but I love that humanity aspect. Man, Scott, like we've covered a lot of ground, and so I do want to kind of circle back in your
Sure.
podcast. So, Iron Sights, where does the name come from? And then people have clearly already gotten a taste of you and the types of conversations you're having. But yeah, tell us a little bit more.
Well, the podcast, like I said, started on the fitness side of things. We were trying to deliver like an episode a week with it was all health and wellness and fitness related stuff. And I was bringing in guests. I have so many connections in this industry over all of my years. And, I was trying to drive some brand awareness and also education, which I believe is the approach to getting people to help them make better or more informed decisions. And if we did a good job, maybe they'd be making an informed decision that would benefit us at the same benefit both me and this consumer, benefit, in a way where we could both benefit. The podcast, then we started dropping a second episode a week. We call it the After Dark episode, and the relationship between Iron Sights and the gym's called Red Dot Fitness, and it is
Mhm.
what you mean, or what it sounds like it means. I was the story goes, a very short version of it goes, is I was in a training group as a coach. Some people thought I might have been a little bit too intense, or whatever at the time. And somebody made a comment about, having a red dot on their chest,
Mhm.
during the training session every time they came or whatever. And I thought that was funny. We all had a good laugh out of it, but it really stuck with me in that you need to be focused, laser focused at the time. That's what red dots were.
Mhm.
Um, you need to be laser focused on whatever it is that you're doing in that moment to achieve the final out or the final goal, whatever that is. So whether that's the rep, the set, the workout in and of itself, the nutrition, the recovery, or whatever else. And same for the coach and the client. Each should be laser focused during that time. The Iron Sights was just sort of a play on words, and more specifically going back to what I was seeing in sort of the firearms and preparedness space, with this a lot of like new wave. Everybody was trying to do something new and sexy, and what occurred to me was the reality was that stuff that the people that were sorry, that folks that were teaching stuff that were the most well respected and seemed to have the most, I don't want to say intelligent, but um, let's just say most put together conversations that were
Sure.
attracting the most attention and getting the most sort of agreement, if you will. And I mean that in a positive way, were those that were sticking to the basics.
Mm.
And it was sort of this old school meets new school. And so the Iron Sights name came up, and just as a compare and contrast.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's how that happened. And those are the people that I was trying to have conversations with. And it's expanded into, we talked to coaches in the industry, we talked to industry leaders that may be on the manufacturing side, people that are involved in everything from combatives to medical to finance to entrepreneurs to, again, the firearms thing comes up quite a bit, because I think it's pretty dynamic and interesting.
Mhm.
And those folks that are really say being successful on the business side of helping people, which is where all the best ones end up starting, was like, I just really want to help people be better at this. They also tend to be very good entrepreneurs, and so there's a bunch of that there that we get to cover as well. So it's pretty diverse. And what I hear from folks is, the compliments I get is people really enjoy the 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 variety of guests that we have on and the different takes that they come with. And we don't always agree on stuff, and we don't always have the same. It's not I I'm challenged with the word diversity these days, but I would say diverse is a solid description of kind of what you would expect to hear on the Iron Sights podcast. Again, Mondays being health, wellness, nutrition, fitness, working out. We keep it basic, in education, and then on Fridays, so the other drop, you could get anything, and you could get anything. And I don't focus on like the major influencer, whoever that is.
Mhm.
I just like having cool conversations with cool people that I think are interesting and doing interesting things. And so that could be anybody.
Yeah. Well, fantastic, Scott. Yeah, I'm excited to come on, and so people can stay tuned for that. And
Yep.
yeah, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with? We covered so much ground from we were talking about society and turmoil, and but then accountability and ownership and leadership and culture and team. So all the types of things that I love discussing. It's been awesome to connect with you. But yeah, anything you want to leave the listeners with, and then where they can find you.
Sure. I just think like one of the things I've learned, and I always sort of knew this from growing up on teams and in groups and things like that, was the importance of community. More specifically, I think what I would boil that down to is the importance of tribe and finding, those individuals that can support you or want to support you in the things that you're doing. They might not always agree with you, and so at the same time, they're supporting you through calling you out on your stuff or challenging you in ways you haven't been challenged before. One of the great parts about this podcast and this journey specifically was that's what I was looking for. I was looking for other people to connect with because I felt so disconnected going back to the beginning of our story. So, or the beginning of today. So I think that the answer is, or the answer to your question is I encourage people to continue to seek tribe and to find their way into a tribe that, gives them those things that I just mentioned, and being very careful in doing that, that you develop your why of what it is that you're looking for, but more importantly, like, why is this important for you, and what are, like, again, we talked about like core values, and what is the intention, what do I intend on bringing, and what do I need, or what do I value in getting back. One of the things I love about social media, I hate it at a lot of levels, but
Yeah, love hate for sure. Yeah.
a lot of levels. But yeah, one of the things that I do recognize is the power in being able to kind of explore things a little bit and kind of get a sense of who these tribes, who these people are, that do subscribe to or are part of these tribes. And what I found is, don't be afraid to have a really small circle. So, like, that's perfectly fine. Doesn't mean you can't be friends with people, but that tribe is important. And once you have that, it's like an anchor point to a lot of things. And when things get crazy, like what we've talked about, I'm not saying tribe, it's not the whole like whose car are we going to take, kind of thing. It's more of like, hey, if I'm having
But
I'm having a
maybe.
rough day,
Yeah.
I need to bounce something off somebody,
Yeah.
I can make that phone call, or whatever. So keep seeking that. Don't give up on that. If you're feeling alone out there, like in the world, trust me, there are plenty of other people, is what I found, that may think the same or think similarly, want to do the same things. And the thing that might surprise people the most is they want to support you. You just got to give them an opportunity to do that. So
Yeah.
that's it. The where you find us, super easy. We're very active on Instagram. You can find the gym at red.fitness on Instagram, red_dot_fitness. And it's Iron Sights Podcast is where you'll see me most active. If you want to get in touch with me, you can always DM me. That's a great way. And then you'll find us on all the major platforms for the podcast: YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.
Yeah. Man, I love it. And knowing your circles and then identifying tribes, right? And they can overlap, and what you gloss from people and groups can be different, right? And you can have like your work tribe, right? Like, so like you might have like under other fitness professionals in just the Bay Area that you have a level of peership that you only really understand there, but then you can gravitate outside that with the power of social media. And like, that's where I truly do appreciate you, man. I appreciate the conversation. I'm better for it. I know a lot of listeners will be better for it, but we got to nerd out on a lot of these most important things like leadership, accountability, and like building team, building tribe. So again, thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
I appreciate you, Eric. Thanks for having me on. I'm honored. Best of luck to you. And if there's anything I can do to support you and your mission and the things you're trying to do there with the podcast and beyond, never hesitate to ask, man.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.